Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for coming to Maternity Action's AGM today. My name's Alice Webb. I'm Maternity Action Trustee and I'm the interim chair. We're going to start with AGM business. We've got a few items to get through, and then we're going to go on to our three speakers starting at 1 p.m. Just to let you all know that we're recording this meeting. And also to note that we've had apologies from Elizabeth Duff from the NCT, and also from Bucky Akinwale from Unison, and from a couple of our trustees, Janet and Nikki. Just to explain that during this business part of the meeting, we've got some voting to do. And that voting is going to be restricted to the board members only, so just the trustees, so nobody else to worry about voting for the next few items that we need to get through. And the first item is the minutes of the AGM we had last year in October, and we need to adopt those minutes. So first of all, I would like to ask our trustees for someone to move that we adopt the minutes. Can I see a hand from one of our trustees? Chloe, and can I have a seconder, please? Aisha, thanks very much. So we have adopted the minutes of the AGM from last October. I'm now going to move on to Maternity Action's chairperson's report. So this is a summary, very brief whistle-stop tour of Maternity Action's work for the year ending January 23. And it was really, really difficult to cut this down to 3 minutes, but well, it's going to be probably more like 4.5. But here goes. Okay, so it was another really busy year with thousands of pieces of legal advice being given by Maternity Action's expert team on the employment and social security rights of pregnant women and new parents, resulting in tangible positive impact on the lives of many women struggling with these issues. Our strong emphasis on partnership working enabled us to reach those who most need our advice. So, for example, in 2022, we commenced the first maternity health justice partnership in the UK. We engaged in research, policy and campaigning for change, including through strategic litigation, which we'll hear more of later. We built partnerships with frontline charities and user-led groups and with unions and other health professional organisations. Our employment and social security service provided expert advice via our advice lines. Our award-winning pro bono email advice service, established in 2020, increased our capacity to deliver advice. We answered 2,938 calls and emails. The demand on the service remains very high. Callers to the advice line reported keeping their job, receiving maternity pay and benefits, resolving health and safety problems, and negotiating a better redundancy process. Callers are predominantly low-income earners, with 77% below average earnings, and 24% were from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds. Our employment and social security service provided legal representation to 513 women and has directly recovered 1.9 million in wages and compensation between August 2020 and December 22. Our free online information sheets on maternity rights at work were viewed over 1.4 million times. Turning to our advice for migrant and asylum-seeking women, we received 526 requests for advice from our unique service on NHS charging. Women sought advice on accessing hospital care and GP services, their liability for charges for maternity care, the likely cost of care, and help to negotiate a repayment plan. Of women receiving intensive casework from this service, 79% were Black and from minority ethnic backgrounds, and 47% disclosed that they were survivors of violence. The service is highly effective. In 2022, we secured cancellation or write-off of over 404,000 of NHS charges for women we represented. A woman who used the service said, I don't know if I would cope without your help, as I had no shoulder to lean on, as I have no family in the country. Maternity Action was my rock. Our Migrant Women's Rights Service delivered training and second-tier advice to frontline charities and health professionals on the rights of migrant and asylum-seeking women to housing, income and healthcare, building vital capacity in this complex area of significant and growing need. Turning to research and policy and campaigning, Maternity Action continued to undertake thoughtful policy and research work, prioritising issues affecting low-income and marginalised women. We influenced the Health and Safety Executive and ACAS to change their guidance on workplace health and safety for pregnant women and new mothers. We partnered with the TUC to prepare a toolkit on protecting the health and safety and well-being of pregnant women in the workplace. We were and still are, I think, the voluntary sector representative on the joint Home Office and NHS England Committee on Maternal Health for Asylum-Seeking Women. We continued to pursue the long overdue evaluation of shared parental leave through the use of parliamentary questions. We worked with our partners to promote our 2021 Alliance for Maternity Rights Action Plan to end pregnancy and maternity discrimination in the workplace. And the early day motion supporting the action plan was supported by 103 MPs. And that is just a whistle-stop tour of just some of the work Maternity Action has done in the last year. All of this fantastic work is a testament to the dedicated staff team at Maternity Action. I'd like to thank them all for their hard work and commitment to making a difference for women facing various different struggles and hardships, often being there for them with expert advice and support, which no one else is able to provide. Many thanks to you too, Ros, for your skilled leadership of Maternity Action through this period. And that is the end of the chairperson's report. And I would like now to ask for a motion to adopt the chairperson's report, please, from the trustees. Would anybody like to? Chloe, thank you. And someone to second it? Aisha, thanks a lot. Okay. We are now going to move on then to the Treasurer's report, and this is over to Chloe.
Thanks, Alice. And just to echo everything you said about the amazing work and the huge thank you. I think this is my third year of being the Treasurer of Maternity Action, but I'm always still surprised and super proud to be associated with all of this amazing work. So yeah, massive thank you. So in the year to January 23 this year, the Maternity Action income was £853,857, which is 50% higher than the previous year. So Maternity Action continues to grow and expand as we've seen in previous years. The bulk of income is from grants from trusts and foundations, and also receiving some income from commissioned work. The increase in income is welcomed because it's allowed us to increase service delivery and meet the high levels of advice and casework demand and for policy and campaigning. So, you know, as we'll keep growing and do the best we can to try and fulfill all of the requirements that we can going forward. So expenditure was slightly below, being 781,886. And the bulk of this spending is on staffing costs. So that's the majority is basically providing the services and the staffing that enables that to happen. At the end of the last financial year, so January 23, reserves were £555,017, of which just over 185,000 of that was restricted, and 369,942 was unrestricted. So we aim to have about 3 to 6 months operating expenses in unrestricted reserves. Because, as we mentioned, the bulk of spending is on staffing, and costs can't be sort of reduced quickly if income is lower than expected. So having this reserves enables us to maintain services despite any fluctuations in income that seem to happen. I think that's all on the Treasurer's report for today. Again, thank you so much, and looking forward to hearing the rest of the AGM as well.
Thanks, Chloe. We need to adopt your Treasurer's report. So can I see show of hands to move and second, I think. Yeah, thanks, Aisha, and me, I think, or Chloe, whoever you want, Ros, for seconding. Thank you, Chloe. So we're going to move on to the election of board members, and in the past year we have not co-opted any new board members. One board member, our chair, Heather Wakefield, stepped down on the 4th of September, hence why I'm interim chairing. We need to elect a new chair today, and we have a proposal to elect Nikki Pound, who is a current trustee on the board, to become our permanent chair. I'd just like to check, first of all, for the minutes, are there any other nominations? No. Okay, well, in that case, I would like to move to elect Nikki Pound as Maternity Action's permanent chair. Can I see a show of hands in support of that? Do we need a seconder as well, Ros? So we'll say Chloe to propose and Aisha to second. Thank you very much, both. The second item on this agenda, in this item, the second thing that we need to do is we need to confirm that Chloe Timms is re-elected as our treasurer. Chloe's happy to stand again. Thank you very much for that. I don't believe there are any other nominations for treasurer. Let me know now if so. No. In that case, I'd like to propose that we re-elect Chloe as our treasurer. And Aisha's seconding that, so I think we've done that. So that finalizes the election of board members item. Before we move on to our speakers, which is the next section of the AGM, I just want to record our thanks to Heather Wakefield, who stepped down early this year after 5 years as chair of Maternity Action. We want to say a big thank you to her for her contribution to the organisation, and just say a little bit about her. So she had a very long career in the union movement. She was head of Unison's local government, police and justice section for 16 years until she retired in August 2018. Before that, she worked for the union as a researcher for the National Union of Public Employees and as a regional official in the Greater London region. And while she was at Unison, she was a member of the Low Pay Commission and the Fawcett LGIU Commission on Women in Local Government. She wrote Triple Whammy, Women and the Cuts in Local Government for the Women's Budget Group. And before joining Unison, she was the Women's Rights Officer at what was then NCCL, now Liberty, and worked for many years on the Lewisham Women's Employment Project, investigating women's employment and training needs in London Docklands. And I know from talking to her how much she loved that part of London. She brought all of this huge expertise to Maternity Action as our chair, and we thank her very much for her contribution to our work during her time as our chair. So thank you very much to Heather. Okay, so now we are moving on to the first of our 3 speakers. In the current difficult political environment, JR, judicial review, remains a key route to securing change. And we're going to talk now about some cases which Maternity Action has had some involvement in, which have changed the law at a time of rising hostility towards migrants. And the slow erosion of employment rights. So first of all, over to Shu Xin Liu, who's barrister at Doughty Street Chambers, and who will speak about the successful High Court challenge to the secret policy of detaining migrants with outstanding NHS debts on their return to the UK. Over to you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Alice, for having me. Just to give some context for the litigation, as many of you know, Maternity Action has been at the forefront of opposing various provisions of NHS charging, particularly challenging its disproportionately discriminatory effect towards women for pregnancy-related charges. We know now from the Windrush review and the quality impact assessment that was done after recommendation by the review that women are disproportionately affected by NHS charging. Now, they are disproportionately affected at the time of charging, but even after many of these women do get leave to remain, that effect continues to impact on them, and they continue to live under the shadows of the hostile environment. And that's the context of the case that I'm about to talk about. So a lot of these women, although the Secretary of State has exercised discretion to grant them leave, notwithstanding outstanding NHS debt, they found themselves over the course of many years to still be stopped and detained when they leave the country on holiday or go to visit family and return to the UK. And that was a pattern that in the course of strategic litigation I was previously involved with Maternity Action in trying to change the way NHS charging worked. We discovered that a lot of contact with Maternity Action related to people who actually had leave to remain, but still were affected by the charging. Now, I'm trying to speak about this in a sort of layperson sense. The Secretary of State has powers to stop people at port. I mean, we all have to go through border control when we come back from the airport, and they can ask questions. The difference here is that they're not only just asking simple questions, simple checks. They are asking the women who have leave to remain, who the Secretary of State has decided to grant leave to remain, to step to a side. And oftentimes we see when we get into an airport, you see a holding area, and that's actually a detention area. And they're asked to sit there and wait. And what they're told is very little. Some are told, well, I need to just go and check some stuff about your NHS debt. Others are asked the question, say, do you have debt? All of which is done under immigration powers to examine them and ask questions. However, these powers to examine are limited to cases where you can the Home Office can genuinely curtail your leave, so shorten your leave, or cancel your leave on the basis of a material change in circumstances. But from anybody's point of view, a layperson can see that actually there is no change of circumstances. The Home Office knew about the debt when they granted leave to remain nevertheless. And these women have, and mostly they are women, have lawful bases to enter the UK. And they also have lawful bases to right to work, to access benefits, etc., as part of the conditions of their leave. But they are stopped and they're detained outside the powers that are permissible under the Immigration Act. And that is the base, that is where the starting point was for our litigation, is that we started thinking about this and wondering why this was the case. And we brought a series of cases. A lot of the clients were maternity action clients, people that contacted Maternity Action for advice. And through the first set of litigation in a case called JTW, we uncovered that actually the Secretary of State had a secret policy. And that secret policy wasn't disclosed, but they did tell us that they did instruct border force officers to stop people who have NHS debt, even though they have leave to remain, to get their updated contacts, because you never know, they might abscond, they might hide from plain view, they might not pay their debt, and also to ask them and seek to agree a repayment plan. I mean, all of this is so outside the ambit of what immigration functions are, but it is essentially to pressure a lot of the people who have NHS debt to repay their debt, and is a way of debt collection, to put it fairly bluntly. That case got permission to proceed in the High Court. So you have to get permission and then you have a full hearing. And we got permission to argue that case in the High Court. And just about a week or so before the hearing, the Secretary of State made an offer to pay some damages to the client to ask, essentially make the case go away. Now, a lot of clients in this position are in a very invidious situation where if they take the money, it's a basis from which they can pay off some of the debt at least. And for that client, that was something that she wanted to do. So the case didn't actually go ahead. But we didn't stop there and ended up bringing a succession of cases. And the cases of MXK and XXB are two clients who were in similar positions. And what I should also say is when these women are detained, they're not detained by themselves. They're detained with their young children, oftentimes with babies who might still be breastfeeding, or 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds. They might be sometimes detained for 30 minutes, but there are longer detentions up to 5 or 6 hours, sitting in a holding area in full view of other passengers walking by, the humiliation, the distress, the stigmatism. That's the context of this. And these two clients also were given an attempt to buy them off by some money, but they batted on because one of the clients had been stopped every time she leaves the country and re-enters since 2013. She is someone who, in the next tranche of extension of leave to remain, will probably get indefinite leave to remain, subject to the NHS charging. But so she is someone who, on any view, has been here for 10 years, is a settled person in the UK, has contributed to the UK. The second client has been here since 2020 and has been also stopped on every single occasion with her children. And through this litigation, we've got even more disclosure of the variety of different bits of policies that actually direct Border Force to stop people to examine their NHS debt. But what we also found is that there is no cohesive system, there's no cohesive policy, there's no cohesive training, there's no records being kept. So when you ask for records of, well, why did they get stopped? How long did they get stopped? What was the justification? All of which are basic requirements for detention. There is no record. One of them had a line in a log that's handwritten that doesn't even match up to the documents that she was given. The other client had no documents given to her. And the other thing that we found out was actually what was happening was, if you have an NHS debt, and it seems if you have some sort of adverse immigration history, some sort of flag is put on the Home Office system, and it's called the Warning Index flag. And that flag is raised at port when you come in and you scan your passport. But when the Border Force person sitting at that front desk sees that flag, they're not told that flag is not terrorism or national security, but just NHS debt. And so actually, for the purposes of entry and exit, it doesn't matter, because you can't curtail my leave, you can't cancel my leave, you need to just wave them through. But because they don't have a system to do that, they have to get up and go to the back office, make the checks. Hence, it's unavoidable that these women get detained. But just because your system is bad doesn't mean that it justifies the unlawful exercise of powers that are not actually there to do this job. And that is the basis upon which the High Court made a finding against the Secretary of State, that they have actually misused the powers to stop someone and detain them solely because they have NHS debt. It doesn't mean that if you have other problems and other issues that have raised concerns about fraud or false representation or material circumstances that are changed that are unrelated to NHS debt, that power can't be used. But in all the case studies that we have, including many from Maternity Action, And that was not the case. The sole reason for the detention and for the stop was NHS debt. Now, that's great for these clients, and these clients will now get some damages arising from their detentions. The Secretary of State has also been directed to publish any policies relating to stops and detention arising from NHS debt. That hope is they'll realize that actually, because they can't do it, they will change their policy, and that any policy they publish is going to say, you cannot do this. But what remains unanswered is the wider issue of the use of these powers to detain and stop. Because the way it was uncovered really was because of the casework that Maternity Action and other organizations do of women who just say, oh, I've just been stopped, I don't know why. And organizations raising this as a question, building up the pattern and the picture, and then working with lawyers to get this exposed. But this is likely to happen to a lot of people without NHS debt, but other adverse immigration history that can't have their leave curtailed or cancelled. We just don't know. There's this warning index system and no safeguards and no checks and balance. So that remains something that is outstanding that still needs to be resolved. But at least for the cohort of people who have leave to remain, but NHS debt, they really shouldn't be stopped and detained in this way. And that is obviously something that Maternity Action has very significantly contributed to. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions later.
Thank you so much, Xu Xin. Yes, if people have got questions, we'll try and answer some of them towards the end of the session. So please do put them in the, I think the Q&A or the chat. Not sure which one, but we'll be keeping an eye out. Thank you so much again, Xu Xin. That was a really interesting talk. I'm so glad that some of those women decided to go forward and hold the Home Office accountable. We're now going to move over to Sasha Brzezinski from Dayton Pierce Glynn, and who's going to talk to us about a successful judicial review around asylum support for pregnant women in Home Office hotels. Over to you, Sasha.
Thanks, Alice. I'm going to talk about two cases actually, but they're quite related, and both of them worked with Maternity Action on. The first one is about the amount of money provided to pregnant women or people with children under 3 years old who are in hotels. The background to this is that the Home Office does provide extra payments, so £3 a week for pregnant women or a child aged 1 or 2, and £5 a week for a child under 1. Pre the pandemic, so these payments aren't made to people in hotels, and pre-pandemic that wasn't an issue because people stayed in hotels for just a short period, usually about 3 or 4 weeks, a little bit more, a little bit less. So the fact that those payments weren't being given for that short period just didn't come up at all. And then I think about a year or two into the pandemic, somebody raised a question on a group which is used by frontline workers, advice workers, NGOs and lawyers, asking whether or not these additional payments should be given to pregnant women and people with kids under 3, additional payments in hotels. And my initial view was, well, yes, it should. These payments are made under particular regulations, under the law, they should be made. And I was referred cases, I was in touch with Maternity Action, and we were trying to get this established. And the Home Office's approach initially was inconsistent. Sometimes they would just say yes and start giving them, but usually, I suppose the priority for most people, the reason why it hadn't come up so far as a priority was to get people out of hotels. And so if a pregnant woman or a family with young children were in touch with lawyers, their priority was to get them out of hotels rather than staying in the hotels, getting the payments. So cases were often settled in that way. People managed to get families dispersed out of the hotels, and the payments would then start. And even occasionally they'd get backdated payments. But there were some cases where the Home Office didn't back down. And so we went through the process that Xu Xin mentioned earlier. Permission was granted by the court to proceed for a judicial review against the Home Office's position not to make these additional payments to people who were living in hotels. And the reason, so that, you know, these payments don't sound like very much, you know, £3 a week or £5 a week, and they aren't very much. But in the backdrop of this is that the total amount given to people in hotels is currently around £9 a week. So having that extra £3 or £5 is a significant additional amount. The Home Office's justification for not giving those payments in hotels is because they said that the payments are to meet nutritional needs, additional nutritional needs, and that should be provided under their contracts with the accommodation providers within the hotels. And it is correct that those are to meet additional nutritional needs. These additional payments came in following a court case of over 20 years ago, because women seeking asylum or families seeking asylum aren't eligible for the Healthy Start. So it's to mirror that provision over 20 years ago. And so yes, purely for nutritional needs, and it's not meant to be for other things that are needed, like telephone, food, that sort of thing. And so the Home Office's position was very much, well, it's additional nutritional needs, ask for more food from the hotels, that's fine, you don't need any extra money. But the evidence I was getting from my clients was that this just didn't happen in practice. They were asking, and pregnant women, people with young children were asking the hotel for extra food, you know, with the additional needs, and the hotel response, I mean, up and down the country, the hotels are saying either just no, you're not going to get anything extra, you just get what everyone else gets, or you're even just told, you know, stop asking, you're being difficult. Don't, you know, I think we had some clients saying, you know, saying, you know, if you don't like it, go somewhere else. And I mean, not only that, but the food in the hotel is atrocious. By, you know, my most clients' evidence, it's, you know, there was food that's mouldy. I've seen pictures of mouldy food. Doesn't cater for particular diets, including if women have got gestational diabetes. Stale, lacking in any flavour, very greasy. The same is provided for children generally as well. And so even sometimes if people were given more, it wouldn't necessarily mean it was of any nutritional value. So the Home Office fought the case very strongly to say you just need to ask for more food from the hotels, and that's all you're going to get. Maternity Action put me in contact with a community midwife who had actually set up a clinic in one of the Home Office hotels because she was seeing a lot of women there. And it was great. Maternity Action put us in contact and supported her because she provided a really helpful witness statement, which the court required be converted into an expert report, and then agreed it could be relied on. But her evidence from the women she was seeing in the Home Office hotel was very, very powerful. It detailed that the women she was seeing in the clinics had very low hemoglobin levels, higher than, I mean, it's all kind of lower, increased more than the average, and then high rates of gestational diabetes, decreased weight gains, and this is all much, the level she was seeing is much more than the average outside of the Home Office hotels. Extended levels of, forgive my pronunciation, hyperemes gravidarium, the extended morning sickness, high levels of mental health difficulties. So she had a really great report, and again, thanks to Maternity Action for putting us in contact, and because they were aware of the work that my clients, the cases that we were bringing, and put us in touch that way. The Home Office, so at court, there was two approaches that we were arguing. Either one, just purely on the law, the interpretation of the law is that the Home Office cannot withhold these payments because the law says they have to be made. But the second ground was that even if the law says that these payments can be made in kind through the provision of additional food, the evidence in our clients' cases were that this just wasn't happening, and there wasn't sufficient evidence that this was happening anywhere. The judge found that on a pure interpretation of the law, the Home Office has to make these additional payments. There's no option for the Home Office to say, well, they can make them in kind. The judge said that went on to say that in our clients' cases, that even if the Home Office could say you can get extra food, that our clients weren't getting that, and the judge was noted that there's not sufficient evidence that their nutritional needs were being met in the hotels. So that was a fantastic result, because it means that thousands of pregnant women and people with kids under 3 who are in hotels can now get these payments. The Home Office, that judgment was on the 21st of July this year. It's taken some time for that to be implemented by the Home Office, and I understand that people are now getting these payments in hotels, although I'm still hearing reports that not everyone is, but that should be happening on the whole by now. And the Home Office is also backdating the payments, starting to do that. It's a bit slower than should be done, given the judgment was almost 3 months ago. But people should be getting backdated payments, which is so it's good news for those people. The second case that I want to talk about is related. So these payments, additional payments, as I said, started around 20 years ago. The £3 and £5 rates were what they were, is what the rates were when they were introduced 20 years ago. So this other case is about challenging the Home Office's refusal to increase the rates, and that's been particularly stark with the inflation increases over the last 18 months. When these rates were introduced 20 years ago, they were around the same rates as a Healthy Start, and Healthy Start has had increases over the years. I'm sure probably not in line with inflation, but they have increased from when they first started. So the Home Office does review the general rates of support. So I said, the £8 and the £9 in the hotel, it's around £47 a week now if you're not in a hotel. And those by law are reviewed on a yearly basis. But the additional payments for pregnant women, people with children under 3, have never been part of that. So the legal challenge was to the Home Office's refusal to include the additional payments as part of the annual regular reviews. So Maternity Action provided a witness statement in support of that challenge. And their evidence was about the nutritional needs of asylum-seeking pregnant women, mothers with new babies who are breastfeeding, and additionally to babies as well. The rates of asylum support provided for this group, so pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and with young children. The evidence is about the inflation, the cost of living crisis impact on this group, and also Healthy Starts, is comparing the two different provisions. We also got an expert report from an economist who set out the differences in the inflation impact on the payments. So £3 a week back in 2023, if you're taking into account not just inflation, but inflation specifically on food and non-alcoholic beverages, because inflation for that has actually been higher than general inflation. So £3 a week in 2003 would only buy you £1.61 worth of food additional nutrition needs now, and what that should be is £5.60. And this is in May 2023, the Economist expert report was. So there's been more increases since then, and similarly the £5 a week will only buy you £2.68 worth of goods now, and should actually be increased to £9.33. So it just shows, the purpose, that part of the challenge is that the purpose of the payments it's not, the payments aren't meeting the purpose, because you can't buy what you were supposed to buy back in 2003. So the Home Office has agreed to include these additional payments for the first time as part of their review, which is good news, because I don't think with that litigation they would have done that. and so the claim has stayed pending that review. It was due to be published by now, but the Home Office say that there's various things going on, sign-offs they need, a bit more consultation, and they hope to announce a decision at the start of December. So both bits of good news on the cases, and again, invaluable support from Maternity Action in helping get these decisions made.
Thanks so much, Sasha. The situation for asylum-seeking women in hotels, in particular, is absolutely dire, and so the increase in payments is, well, really, really welcome. I'm sure, although not enough, indicated. Just to remind people, if you'd like to ask questions of Shushin or Sasha, we will have a bit of time at the end. Before 2 o'clock to fit a few questions in, so please do put them in the chat or the Q&A. I think I can see one in the Q&A at the moment. We'll come back to that. So thanks again, Sasha, and we are now going to move on to Katie Wood. And Katie Wood is a barrister at Maternity Action, and she's going to outline 2 first-tier tribunal cases on access to maternity pay, and some of the other cases that Maternity Action is supporting in our casework service. So I hope I've introduced that correctly, Katie. It's over to you.
Lovely. Thank you, Alice. Yes, I lead the Employment and Social Security team at Maternity Action. I'm going to talk about our casework service, which supports new mothers at work, and 2 successful tribunal cases that we hope will improve access to maternity pay. So our casework service started in 2020. It's been a 3-year project, and we've just completed the final year of that project. We work in partnership with the wonderful team at Yes Law. They're another legal advice charity, and we've been able to provide casework support to over 630 women now over the last 3 years. At the start of the project, which was in 2020, we certainly didn't expect to be setting up a casework service during a global health pandemic, which revealed wholesale ignorance of pregnant women's health and safety rights at work, and which has seen wave after wave of redundancies ever since, in which pregnant women and women on maternity leave continue to be targeted for redundancy. And post-pandemic, I think in the last year, in particular, what we're seeing is that many employers are now insisting that employees return to the workplace, and that they are implementing hybrid working arrangements with a minimum number of days in the workplace. And this is a requirement that many new mothers are unable to meet because of their childcare arrangements, because of school drop-offs and school pickups, and particularly because of things like the lack of affordable childcare options at the moment. And this is leading to many new mothers being dismissed or forced to resign. So for our casework support, we prioritise those who have lost their job, their income or maternity pay, those who are facing pregnancy and maternity discrimination, and are being pushed out of their job. And the aim of our casework service is to help women to keep their job wherever possible, and to resolve the dispute with their employer. If this isn't possible, we help to negotiate a settlement. Now, there's very limited funding options for legal representation for employment tribunal claims, and it can be a long and very complex process, let alone for somebody with a new baby. So in employment disputes, we actually try to avoid litigation. We try to avoid it going to tribunal wherever we possibly can. What we want to try and do is to keep a good working relationship, particularly where the woman wants to keep her job or to return to work after maternity leave. So we're looking at ways to resolve the dispute. And obviously it can be a long and a costly process for employers too. So reaching a settlement in the early stages can be better for both sides. It avoids the risk of litigation, and it enables both the employer and the employee to move on. Now, this year as well, we launched an employer's toolkit with model policies and guidance for small and medium-sized businesses. Now, we have at Maternity Action, and I'm very lucky to have a team of hugely experienced and highly committed employment lawyers. And it's their work that has helped to support our clients to secure improvements in their health and safety at work, to protect their pay and maternity pay, to negotiate flexible work, resolve disputes on return from maternity leave, and in some of our cases to be reinstated following a pregnancy-related dismissal. And over the last 3 years, the latest figure we have is that we have secured just over £2.4 million in unpaid wages, unpaid maternity pay, and settlement agreements. And obviously, all of those outcomes, financial outcomes, are continuing to rise as we close some of our remaining cases. Now, we're only able to support a small number of tribunal cases, and so we try and prioritise those that could clarify or improve on existing maternity rights. I'm going to talk next about the 2 maternity pay cases that we've taken to tribunal in the last year. So just by way of background, there's 2 types of maternity pay. Statutory maternity pay, which is paid directly by the employer and reimbursed by the government. And then there's maternity allowance, which is a benefit that you have to claim from the Department for Work and Pensions. Now, the whole point about maternity allowance is that it's intended to provide a safety net, particularly for low-income women, for women who can't qualify for statutory maternity pay, and also for self-employed women. But its maternity allowance is designed to ensure that nearly all employed and self-employed women, or women who have been employed or self-employed until recently, can claim some form of maternity pay to enable them to take time off following the birth of their baby. However, we find that women are frequently wrongly refused maternity allowance, particularly those in self-employed or in secure work, leaving them with little or no maternity pay. Now, many women also need to continue doing some work during their maternity leave period, particularly during the current cost of living crisis. The law allows women to work for 10 what's called keeping in touch days without losing their maternity leave or their maternity pay. Now, maternity pay is currently only £172 per week, which is less than half the national minimum wage for a full-time worker. So being able to do a small amount of work, particularly that fits around nap times, breastfeeding, grandparents' availability for help with childcare is essential. And it enables many new mothers to top up these very low rates of maternity pay and to keep in touch with their workplace. For self-employed women particularly, it's important because they need to be able to keep their businesses going, to keep in touch with clients in order to actually have something to return to at the end of their leave. Now, the Department for Work and Pensions can make a partial reduction in maternity allowance payments if a woman has continued to do a small amount of work during her maternity allowance period. But they often automatically disqualify women from the remainder of their maternity pay once they've completed the first 10 working days, particularly for women that work variable hours. And we'd been particularly keen to challenge this practice, and that's what we brought a successful case on in the first tier tribunal at the end of last year. So our client was a professional musician and music teacher. She was unable to continue performances, orchestral performances, and all the rest during her maternity leave. That was normally what took up the bulk of her work and was the majority of her income. But she wanted to be able to continue teaching some of her local pupils, some of the music lessons that she gave in schools. Teaching, however, was only a tiny part of her normal working hours and a tiny part of her normal income. Now, the Department for Work and Pension had ended her maternity allowance once she'd completed the first 10 days of work. And in actual fact, during those 10 days, she'd only done 11 hours of teaching work. But from that point, they were disqualifying her from the rest of her maternity allowance. So that meant that for the rest of her maternity leave, she'd have no maternity pay. And during that period, she'd only done 21 hours of additional music teaching. So the tribunal agreed with us and decided that the Department for Work and Pensions had wrongly disqualified her from her remaining maternity allowance and had failed to make a reasonable disqualification, as they could have done under the regulations. And so going forward, DWP will need to properly assess the amount of work a woman has done compared to her working arrangements before her maternity leave, before disqualifying her from the rest of her maternity pay. Now, the other case we took more recently, we represented a woman who was refused maternity allowance following her baby's stillbirth. Now, a stillbirth is considered to be where labour occurred after the end of the 24th week of pregnancy. And in these circumstances, a woman is entitled ordinarily to maternity leave and pay. However, there can be uncertainty about how to work out the end of the 24th week of pregnancy, and this tribunal decision does give us some clarity. Now, in this case, the hospital had issued our client with a certificate estimating that her pregnancy had lasted for 23 weeks and 3 days. So she was short of the 24-week period in order to be able to be issued with a stillbirth certificate. Now, this is a medical estimate, and a medical estimate of the length of pregnancy can be based on a range of factors, such as scans and examination of the fetus, or counting forward from the first day of the last menstrual period. Now, if a medical professional estimates that a pregnancy lasted for a full 24 weeks, then obviously a certificate of stillbirth will be issued, and a woman is entitled to the maternity leave and any maternity pay that she qualifies for. Now, we argued in this case that for the purposes of working out entitlement to maternity allowance, the regulations state that the end of the 24th week of pregnancy can be calculated by counting backwards. So counting back 16 weeks from the expected week of childbirth. And by this calculation, our client's labour occurred on the day after the end of the 24th week of pregnancy. So the tribunal again agreed with us and said we were right. Under the regulations, for maternity pay, the end of the 24th week of pregnancy can be calculated by counting back 16 weeks from the expected week of childbirth. So it gives us some welcome clarity. Our client was awarded her maternity allowance, and we've asked Department for Work and Pensions to review their guidance on eligibility for maternity pay following a stillbirth, so that other families are not faced with taking a claim following the loss of their baby. In both of these cases, our clients had to return to work early, having had no maternity pay and lost out on the rest of their period of maternity leave. So these are first-tier tribunal decisions. They're not binding on other tribunals, but they are a useful guide as to how the law should be interpreted. And we hope that this will result in clearer guidance and improve access to maternity pay. So that's an overview of the work of the Employment and Social Security team, and also obviously happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Katie. I am now going to invite questions to our speakers. And I'm just going to have a quick look in the Q&A because I can see, I think we've got a couple. Looks like one at the moment for Shushin, and probably one possibly for Sasha, although that one looks like a difficult one. The first question from Adam Patterson for you, Shushin. Have you seen any incidents of women being detained indefinitely after the warning index flag results in their initial temporary detention at the airport due to any other issues identified through the checks completed?
Probably not indefinitely, because if indefinitely, they'll probably still be at the airport now. So, I mean, I think in the two cases that we brought to court, the judge did find in both cases that the check on the warning index flag should have taken no more than about 15 minutes. I mean, frankly, the Secretary said it hadn't produced any evidence as to what the process is and actually how long it would take. But if all it is going into the back office and doing the same check, but being able to see what the warning index flag says, then that shouldn't take very long. So he knocked off 15 minutes as in terms of what was lawful and what was unlawful. So in the first claimant's case, the first detention was about 45 minutes. So he says 30 minutes of that was unlawful. So it's about accounting for the 15-minute check, and then thereafter anything beyond that where there are no other issues. And in all of these cases, there weren't other issues. It's really difficult to know actually what's happening at port, because I mean, part of this is people go through this process and they're too afraid to say anything, and they are stigmatized, they're humiliated, they're scared because they have limited leave to remain, they have NHS debt, and they think that they're in the wrong. So people don't come forward, and it really is about people coming forward and asking the questions that ended up being the basis for the litigation.
Thanks, Shushin. Yeah, I can see Adam's just put another comment. He was asking specifically if people would be, if you know of people taken to detention centres and detained indefinitely in detention centres as a result of an NHS debt flag. I think that's
I don't know, but I think that applying some sensibility about the Home Office, that they're not even that extreme, that you can't detain someone in a detention centre other than for the purposes of removal, really. Yeah. And unless and until you can curtail or cancel their leave, they wouldn't be someone that would be liable to be removed because they have leave to remain. The policy and the problem with the policy is that they're being stopped for the purposes of trying to collect the debt or pressure them to go and repay it. So it's a mechanism, it's a big stick mechanism, basically, and giving them a bit of a fear and scare about their outstanding debt. You know, I wouldn't take it as far as they will be detained, because that wouldn't happen. And also, although we don't have time limits on detention, it tends not to be totally indefinite, although obviously that oftentimes requires a challenge to end the indefinite nature of it. But no, not in this context.
Okay, thanks very much. And okay, so there is another question from Alejandra about asylum seeking mothers in hotels, and Alejandra, you're talking about the difficulties that you've been having supporting women who've been provided unsuitable food for toddlers through the hotel, and you've complained to Migrant Help, and the statement from the hotel is that they've been offered a tailored menu, and that the menu was requested by the families. Then you've tried to raise a complaint, but the Home Office is taking up to 20 working days. And your question, is there any way to guarantee a fair investigation around food in the hotels, maybe involving safeguarding boards? Okay, Sasha.
Well, I mean, yes, echoes what I said. My client's experience wasn't experience of others, of just having wholly inappropriate food for children and pregnant women, nursing mums, and weaning as well. I mean, the Home Office got a safeguarding team, as have the accommodation providers, contractors, but they don't tend to answer when there's very serious safeguarding issues raised about violence, etc. in accommodation. I'm not saying don't write to them, but they don't expect a response. The complaint that you say you've done is one way of doing it, and it does take 20 working days generally. They'll probably just come back and say the same thing. What I would say to do is to ask the people that you're working with to take photographs of the food and, you know, a diary, because I think that's the only way that they'll be able to show that what's being said by the hotel, because the hotel standard response is, oh, you know, we have this menu, we do, you know, we've given them extra, etc. So just having a record, a photographic and a record and a diary of what's happening. And yeah, I suppose that in a way then to dispute what is actually being said by the hotels. I mean, I wonder whether the local authority might want to get involved, but I think only if there's real issue with a risk of neglect, and I think that's probably going to be quite hard to show. A sort of a side issue is a way out of it. There was a helpful court judgment a couple of months ago where the court had said that a family who'd been in the hotel for had made a finding that at least at the point where the family had been in the hotel for 8 months, so it could have been sooner, that was unsuitable because of various aspects such as the food, the cramped space, depending on the age of the children. So it might just be worth, if the family has been in the hotel for some time, referring them to a solicitor to see if they can try and get them out on that basis.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Please do, if anyone else has got any other questions for our speakers. I think Shushin has to head off pretty quickly, so please do ask them now if you have got any, or about any of anything you've heard about our work today. You're welcome to ask us questions now. Just in the meantime, Sasha, I was just going to ask you whether you know what the timeline is on that review of asylum support rates, when we think we might know what the Home Office's view is on the next upgrade.
I mentioned the start of December. I'll just double check the email because it's only from the end of last week. I've got the 1st of December in mind. I think that's when the stay on our claim should be lifted, but I think that's probably the same time that they've said that they will announce what the review is on the general rates, and specifically on the additional payments, but also on the maternity grant provided to women seeking asylum, because I think that also hasn't ever been increased either since it was introduced.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to check and see if I've got any other questions for our panelists. Missed anything?
So just check the email. So the stay is till the 1st of December. So I would expect we get a response before then. So yeah, watch this space. It'll be the last couple of weeks of November when they make the announcement. Okay.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I am going to wrap up at this point then with really huge thanks to our speakers today, Katie, Shushin and Sasha. Thanks so much for coming, talking about Maternity Action's input, talking about Maternity Action's work, Katie, and also talking about Maternity Action's input into these really important cases for women. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everybody else who came and spoke today, or asked questions, listened, contributed, were part of our AGM. And I'm just going to take 1 minute to ask if anyone has any other business, and I'm going to just give 10 seconds for you to type if you do. And I think that's a no. So thank you very, very much again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.